I watched the CEO, the new CEO, talk about it.
Yeah.
About him trying
that's John Ray.
Yeah. Trying to unravel it. And it's amazing.
Everyone loses confidence. Everyone sells their FTT tokens. No one wants to buy it. It's worth nothing.
So how did this all fall apart?
Great question. So he broke that showed that maybe they're not as healthy as they should be. There would have been a run on the banks and people would have found out. It's just like, when are they going to find out? It just, he happened to be the final straw, if that makes sense.
So someone would have...
I used to play like a variant of League. So I know it's fun, but it's not like fun to the point. Look, this guy's whole thing was like, I'm this effective altruist. What I know is everyone's always interested in pulling up the ladder after them. And like building the kind of the rule book around like, hey, like if you're from this certain jurisdiction that we're a part of, you're fine. If you're not, like, so we were warning people, hey, this is probably insolvent, get your money out. But CZ ultimately was the big, like, he was the most notorious and like well-respected. Tom Brady backs him. Well, Tom Brady's got to have some guys who are looking into this. And then it's like, well, BlackRock backed him. Well, BlackRock definitely has some guys who looked into it. Right. It's Sequoia Capital. They said he was that's what ultimately matters is how much do you have on deposits that you owe out. And so with Binance, we don't really know. The only one we have a little bit more of a look into is the money system has to be safe. Like your grandma has to be able to charge back her credit card when there's a fraudster, right? Like, or this whole thing doesn't work. You can't rely on people being technically savvy in order to do these trades that are profitable in crypto. So the way he first made his money was he did something where he bought Bitcoin in the U.S. and then he sold it on these Japanese. He's a shark. He knows what he's doing.
What was the conflict between the two of them that led him to do that?
The conflict was, it's a great question. The conflict was ultimately that Sam was trying to get some regulations passed, and he, like, the house always wins, right? So when FTX was taking off, it just seemed like everyone who was a someone was backing him. So then it was okay. And then I think a lot of these people deferred from the, you know, the arms of one huckster to another. Like, it's just like, it's almost to something worse. They're not having sort of like, it's maybe not big enough. You know, they're good people, a lot of the people going after these guys, but it's like trying to catch everyone who's speeding. Your hands in both pockets. But publicly, he's just like, he's donating to Democrats because he says, oh, I'm like this, like, you know, I care about all these issues. Yeah. But it's like even more cynical than just buying one party. His whole thing was he did this thing with Ultimate Bet. So he was one of the lawyers. So there's this poker site called Ultimate Bet. And he got caught in this scandal where they had enabled this thing called very strange. And these offshore entities were also using like U.S. branches. Like there's FTX US, which was like more regulated, but not really that regulated. It's reputable people like BlackRock, Sequoia Capital. They all invest in this guy. Kevin O'Leary famously promoted it for like $18 million.
They gave him $18 million to promote it?
He says...
and sell off all his tokens. Would they be still solvent today or still in operation today? Would they not crash, or was this inevitable?
Nobody knew what was going on behind the scenes. So even though they said, like, we're not going to touch your money, as soon as you deposited Bitcoin, I mean, I talked to some of the insiders at Alameda. They said they had this backdoor...
Views about what? Like, you didn't start doing this. You started doing just like a normal interview show?
I was just doing a normal interview show with a few of my buddies. But FTX was sort of the worst offender. Is let's say I give you a loan, Joe. So an unsecured loan would be I give you $1 million and I don't ask for anything. What are you saying in the terms of service that means that I can't sue you? You have all these terms of service that basically say none of what I'm saying is true. Like they say they can get you rich in the sales pitch, and then in
regulators, when he was trying to impose regulations or encourage regulations, how could that have benefited him as opposed to Binance? Like what could they have possibly done to make it easier?
Then he comes up, prep school. He's kind of like built for success, right? He goes to MIT, goes to Jane Street as this quantitative trader. So he decides to donate dark to a Republican, like to Republicans. And part of the accusation is he knowingly did this through one of his, you know it's kind of too good to be true, but the social proof is overwhelming, and it overwhelms your kind of like alarm bells. So the social proof is a combination of things. So first of all, it's like
Binance hasn't had similar problems. problems.
No, they've had a few runs and they've covered withdrawals. I mean, so it's just the problem is a lot of it's a black box. All the crypto people were trying to control regulations to favor their individual business situation. And so CZ felt like he was being cut out in Washington. It was inevitable. So something to understand. FTX was insolvent long before it was realized that they were insolvent. Right? So that's wire transfer, and it's kind of expensive to do these. Like, you pay all these fees for wire transfers. So the idea is like, okay, well, if you have crypto, those wire fees can go down. And instead of taking, maybe a day or something, it'll take like really perpetuated their fraud. I can break it down. How much do you know about the FTX
Let's
situation?
break it down for people that don't know about it. So
let's do it. So FTX was this crypto exchange. Lizzie on Twitter, I probably butchered his name, but he was actually originally sort of an ally of Sam. So he invested in FTX early on, put $100 million in, and so if you default on that loan, I'm out $1 million. Another way is I ask for, okay, I'll take some equity in the studio if something goes wrong, right? So I cover my butt if you default on it. Now, this thing. So all this money's going in, and then you basically wait. And as you're waiting, Ethereum's going out everywhere. A bunch of people are withdrawing, right? Because they're also taking their money out.
Right.
By the time, fine. And then FTX US went bankrupt, and he's the one who put it into bankruptcy. And then he's telling everyone, oh, no, the money's actually still there. I mean, he was constantly giving a conflicting narrative. I mean, he was, really well regarded in Wall Street. So when people invested with him, they knew the returns were insane, but located out in the Bahamas, which is a great place to put your.
Why do they do it in the Bahamas?
Because it's unregulated. So the problem with doing stuff in the United States, you're just having to trust these shady offshore entities that they're telling the truth. Binance says they're fine. They show proof of reserves, but what are their liabilities?
Chemtrails.
Let me say this. If it's too good to be true, if they're offering market returns that you want to believe in, you go, man, I want to believe this is real. There were some margin trading accounts. And I'm like, no, but there were people who didn't trade with margin. There were people who just put their money with you. And all they wanted, you can know their assets. So it's like a big thing recently in crypto. They'll say, hey, we're going to show you proof of reserves. What does that mean? They mean we'll show you on-chain he's one of the leaders at the NASDAQ. I mean, he was one of the go-to guys. And so you thought, well, I invest with Bernie, like I can't lose. It's like almost, betting on the house. The fact that this guy, he got away with lying so long and perpetuating this image of himself as this generous billionaire. He's sort of the next Warren Buffett, that when everything goes wrong.
So when I see something like that go down, I'm like, how did he get Steven Spielberg? How does someone like a Bernie Madoff or Sam Bankman-Fried, how does he get these people to do this?
Launches FTX in 2019, and that's a crypto platform where honestly you can make a lot more money than just with a trading firm. So FTX quickly skyrockets in popularity, and that's ultimately what he was doing. But it also looks like he was donating through some of his executives. And, I mean, the whole thing was shady all the way down.
Down because it seems like they received additional scrutiny, right? Because now people are starting to look at it, and I saw that their value went down considerably.
Yeah, really taking that. I mean, maybe some of them were taking it seriously, but not enough.
So if FTX didn't encourage regulation and CZ didn't get upset at that
person in the space, to where people thought, okay, well, if he's saying it, he's a guy who only says positive things about crypto because he's a crypto executive. So if he's saying there might be problems, there's probably some problems. But touch your money, obviously. That was the whole point. It's like, you deposit with us, we're not going to do anything with your money. It's your money. It's like a deposit. It's almost like a bank. Like you deposit with a bank. Your bank isn't supposed to go ahead and take your money, FTT tokens, and pay everybody out.
Oh, that's what he thought? He's on amphetamines, right? So he can't be thinking totally clearly. It wasn't a scam. I've said this before because I root for nerds to be that successful, that you just completely living outside the norms of society, just fucking crypto.
Ransomware. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. 100%. Because before it was like, okay, you need to use like Western Union or sort of one of these places where you can kind of send money without too much scrutiny. The account fiat at FTX. And so what prosecutors are now arguing is he knew, of course, what it was. He deliberately obscured, is buying both, lying about it so that you can get all the good press of like caring about all these social issues while also not caring at all. Sam goes, oh, you won like our battle. And people were like, you know, is it a battle when you lose billions of dollars of customers? He cleaned up on all his own customers, just basically taking their money. Like, oh, I know exactly when to fold. I know exactly when to bet. So he had God mode enabled, and then they found out these exchanges where it was worth more. So he was arbitraging this difference in prices, and then after he made his money that way, he sort of, this is a fraud because, you know, no one knew. There's a bunch of backing. So I made a video at the time being like, this crypto CEO just describes a Ponzi scheme. He lost it on the platform. He says the 18 million was on FTX or whatever, and he never got $1 out of it. But that was what the deal was for. Will fall for something doesn't mean you're safe. Like, you have to do, I hate to say do your own research because that's such an overused, like, scammy phrase. It's actually such like a phrase like that, you know, it's almost victims would reach out to me. They'd be like, hey, I'd been scammed by this guy and I didn't realize what was going on. And you showed me, you know, sort of like how the whole scheme worked. You can watch them. These are real people, Joe. You can be just like them. And so I started watching this and I started like seeing it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. I hate doctors so much, and it always seems to like end up with a sales pitch. Like, it never was like, hey, let me just give you this free thing. It was like always like there's a catch. Mm-hmm. So they're like, look, I've been screwed by the banks. Every time the government's printing a bunch of money, where do I go? Right? You can understand the appeal, but it's just like you went to their other friends. They're all saying it's okay. Let me put money in. And it's just a huge case study that just because other people, they've recently been shut down. But the idea was
just the idea of putting your money into tornado cash.
Yeah, it's wild.
Is there a better?
All these other guys buy into him.
Right.
And then they themselves are kind of also looking at each other, being like, well, that guy did it. Like, what? It's the hottest deal. Found out how to be successful. And if you invest with me, I'll save you time. You know, you could do it yourself, Joe. You could do it. But what? It's going to take you 5 years. Get with me, and I'm going to shortcut your success. 2 months. You're going to be making 5 figures a month. 10 months, maybe 6 figures a month. And I've done it for people before. That's the social proof. I've shown people how to do this. This is what was going on in crypto. They're called collateralized loans. But what FTX was doing was they were saying, hey, like, we'll take $1 million from you, but instead of giving you, make something work, if it's going to go to the public, you have to solve all these issues. And unfortunately, we saw crypto kind of go mainstream before they had door. And like, one of the first things the guy does is he controls it, but he renounces ownership. He goes, oh, I'm passing it off to some sham director. And he goes, I don't have anything to do. I don't know. It's left. And ultimately, because they had lost billions of dollars, it left billions of dollars in credit claims, basically. They didn't have the money, which thankfully she did, and she's fine now. She takes medication to replace the hormones her thyroid would generate. But I saw my mom kind of get swept in this thing that I knew was nonsense. Reasons that our banks have a bunch of anti-money laundering laws. There's a reason that they have all sorts of finance laws. It's not for their safety. It's for your safety. I mean, it's like they need to deal, but I'm from the Bahamas and I'm American, so that might be fine. I mean, everyone's always interested in the regulations benefiting them. The challenge now, though, is, you know, a lot of people had back.
It's amazing that things with this amount of money can get this far sideways before anyone knows what's going on.
This is the problem with offshore accounts and stuff. I'm blanking on the name right now. But
A1Z? What is that?
No. I'm sorry. I'm blanking on. It's this famous. I'm going to remember it right after I get out of here. It's one of the famous. Right. It's all at some address, and so people were asking, like, "Where's? You say you have all this Bitcoin. Where's the Bitcoin? You say you have all this Ethereum. Where's the Ethereum?" FTX's influence went from the Bahamas, reaching into the United States, while technically not really being regulated by the United States.
Yeah, they were the number 2 donor to the Democratic Party.
You know, now if you're some criminal, laundering money has just never been easier. Instead of taking $100,000 across the border or wiring it where it can get held up by a bank, right? The inflation rate, I think, is like 75% or something like that. It's an unimaginable, it's just out of control inflation. And if you hold on to your Turkish lira, you're in for a bad time. There was already all this worry in the past. That summer, there had been a bunch of companies that collapsed, and people had never thought FTX. It was kind of the first time anyone thought FTX could maybe not have the money. Somebody found out about this God mode. And so the lawyer's like, how do we basically cover this up? Dan Friedberg's like, how do we, what do you want me to do? And he's like, hey, why not? Like, there were just no adults in that room. And like the few adults that there were like, they had like a criminal lawyer. Well, anyway, I don't think he's actually been convicted of anything. I shouldn't say that. They had this guy, Dan Friedberg. A lot of people found out about crypto the same time the mainstream media, everyone else did. So by the time they're actually investing,
it's too late.
It's too late. I think the most fair case you could make about
why the celebrities are important, and that's why
huge part of it.
The connection to BlackRock is important.
Huge part, yes, because they're the legitimacy that says, "Hey, I'm, crypto keys all the time." I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea where you go, "I'm going to get in before everyone else," but a lot of senators' office reached out to me. They're like, "What do you think about this?" And I was like, "I don't know, man. You guys have to. This is y'all's thing to figure out. Ultimately, y'all to expose. But I'm interested in the characters who perpetuate fraud because they're such interesting psychological case studies. Sam Bankman-Fried, you could probably write a whole book about. Does a Matt Levine interview with Sam Bankman-Fried. He didn't call him a fraud outright, but he's like, "Hey, it seems like you're in the Ponzi business, and business is good."
Whoa! And what did he say to that?
Money system. I mean, yeah, especially in our modern age, I mean, it seems like you can understand where they're coming from, the average person.
Regulated? Like if he was doing this, like Coinbase can't do this. Is that correct?
Yeah, Coinbase is much more heavily scrutinized. They actually have to file with the SEC. You have Dogecoin. You have SafeMoon. You have FTT, which is what FTX was using as their native token. So a lot of these guys, you'll start a crypto exchange.
I really enjoyed you catching him on Twitter Spaces. I really enjoyed that. I listened to that whole thing because before that, you have this guy who's this,
But it was very clear the internal conversations were they knew they were committing fraud. They knew they were doing things wrong. And this idea was, well, no one's going to catch us, right? That is his background. And so I asked, Sam, I was like, what does it say if this is your chief regulatory officer? This guy on sticks or something. It was never, the problem was the foundation was wrong from the beginning. If you don't have enough deposits to cover withdrawals, you just don't have the money, right? Your Coinbase, it seems like they're, legitimate, but so much of the problem with crypto is we don't know how much of this stuff is money laundering. We don't know how much of this stuff is
whiz kid who you listen to him talk. He has an answer for everything. He's so articulate. He's so knowledgeable. I listened to previous interviews before he got busted. Jamie's looking it up.
I thought I knew it off the top of my head, and now I don't want to say the wrong one. A16Z.
A16. In the terms of service, they said results may vary. What's that about?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, ultimately, it's and so I realized, there's this sophisticated way that they're preying on my psychology, and they're really going to sell most of our FTT that we got from that deal. And we're going to sell it. We don't know what's going on there. And all of a sudden, it starts this firestorm because people are like, he'd be afraid of being indicted. Or I don't really understand why he can't go, but he can't go to America. So Sam was meeting with regulators. CZ felt cut out, like he was basically going to get a bad deal. I started hearing about these tokens. And they're like, hey, selling courses, it's always the new grift. You always have to find, because people figure it out. They go oh, that actually doesn't work. Hey, drop shipping is not. So I decided to start pursuing it step by step. And at first it was just me discovering well, what is this? Well, how does this scheme work? Okay, so I buy this course and then what? Is not surgery. You can just treat it naturally. Just don't worry about, hey, don't listen to the doctors. Don't listen to your general practitioner. You can just treat it with like colloidal silver. Most of this 10 billion is just their own tokens. So CZ takes this opportunity to kind of spread some, sort of information about that. He says, hey, we're actually shocking thing. And I think that shows, like, if you're running a shady empire, like, who's better than a shady lawyer to try to help you cover it up, right?
How did you get in
money? Like, well, how can you view this as a battle? Like, but he viewed it as like, we're sparring partners. Like, and you won this round or you won the war.
Because he thinks this is going to go on forever.
He launches Alameda Research first, which is just like this trading firm, which basically the idea here is we have some ideas. We're going to raise a little bit of money and we're going to do assets. You can check yourself. Like, I have $1 billion in USDC. Well, that's great. But it doesn't matter if I have $1 billion in crypto, Bitcoin, whatever, if I owe $2 billion.
Right.
Now I can just send you $100K. It's going to take me 5 minutes.
So that's why when people like kidnap people's data and things along those lines, they like to get paid.
It's a strange time, man, to be covering crypto, because I tried to tell people for years that this scam problem, this fraud problem, or something like Europe or something like that, is you are subject to all these regulations which require you to be a little more careful.
Oh, those are pesky.
Yeah, they're in TT. So it looks like, if you just look at their assets, it looks like they're covering their liabilities. They owe customers $10 billion. Looks like they have $10 billion, but like I wanted to basically influence politics by just donating. And the idea is you donate to both sides, you can never lose, right?
Yeah.
If you have act that bill, and now that it was all a fraud, or the guy who basically pushed it was a fraud, now they're like trying to retool it. Your issue is that anytime there's demand for withdrawals, you're going to encounter problems. So it was going to be inevitable anytime any store. After the fact, he's like still playing video games, and you're like, can you have the decency to get off the video game and talk to people?
So bizarre. It's just so bizarre. Go back to making money again.
I don't think he thought he would repay everyone, but everyone thought like, oh, we'll just enter Chapter 11 bankruptcy. We'll restructure the company. We'll reopen. We'll just turn all the debt into new.
What is it's a crypto exchange, right? So
Yeah,
how does that work?
So the first question is, when you learn about crypto, I lied my way into it. I can sort of lie my way out of it. And this is what he did. So prior to this, I'd interviewed him twice before, and I had kind of gotten hamstrung with he's just so good at dodging stuff. How you're going to make some money. And so people invested in FTX thinking that this is going to be a safe platform. This kid is smarter than everyone else. The problem is, when at the exact moment FTX can't pay you back is the exact moment that FTT becomes worthless. So you think you have all this collateral, like investment funds. They invested in a bunch of NFT projects. Mark Andreessen, I think, is the guy who runs it.
And probably overly confident.
Yeah, it's pretty clear he didn't see like the full scope of the situation, especially at first. It seemed like he thought, he was like saying FTX US was scandal. Now is they're finding a bunch of campaign finance violations because he was trying to influence politics, U.S. politics. I mean, it's insane how deep change that money for some type of crypto token. There's a lot of different tokens out there. And
explain tokens, because I don't understand tokens. I know there's crypto and there's tokens. Like, what is the difference between the two?
$10 million or your data's lost forever. And you're like, call the police, and you go, hey, track this guy. And they're like, to what? To a Bitcoin wallet? To crypto is... Sometimes national currencies aren't a great idea and you want an alternative. So, like, look at the Turkish lira.
Initially, he thought he was going to be able to figure out a way to pull all the company's assets together and
I think
make everybody sound and repay everyone. And
at the end, when you're, like, ready for this thing to go down, because I know as soon as I get on, it's going to end pretty quickly after. I said, let me ask him some real hard questions. Because all these guys are like, Sam, we had
one guy who lost a hard drive, and who's paying people to go through a landfill
Yeah.
to try to find his hard drive because there's billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin on that hard drive.
Yeah, people lose their. I hadn't really found my footing, but throughout my entire life, I had kind of had this relationship with like hucksters and fraud, where when I was in high school, my mom got thyroid cancer. Gay, so like, can you do this?
So someone had to be gay to do it, like.
No, basically they were like, we need someone trustworthy we can trust to do this. So, hey, you're going to be the guy. Like, I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world, and that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's like maximize productivity, maximize human happiness. There's some of these people making hundreds of millions of dollars. People are miserable at the end of it, and nothing happens. And that was the start of my show.
So you start just doing interviews.
They have to say what they have, where they're putting their money. They're subject to more regulation about like how they take care of customer deposits. One of the big things with FTX was they told people, hey, you put your money with us. We're not going to touch it. We're not going to move it. That's what FTX. You think you have this backstop because on the books it's worth, X dollars. Let's say it's like worth $5 a coin. But what you're not realizing is the real risk is when FTX can't pay you back, they probably can't pay anyone back. The son of Harvard lawyers, we just sort of can't lose. And nobody paid attention to some of the red flags that were going on until ultimately it was too late. It turns out he thinks he can reestablish control because he's so smart. He is such a good liar that he's like, I can just lie my way out of it. So I think that's why he ultimately talked. His idea was, if I have something, because I was just like, why does this make some people tens of millions of dollars and nothing happens? He blamed all the wrongdoing of FTX on Alameda Research. And he said, I don't control Alameda Research. Even though he was the owner, he's no longer what he said in one of the interviews. He goes, no one believes me when I said I donated dark because no one believes anyone would be like, everyone wants the credit for donating. No one believes that I just do it on the sly. 5 minutes or 3 minutes. So I don't want to give off the idea that like there's nothing here, but the problem is that with the
party,
that's right. But
also to the Republicans,
this is what's wild. So
yeah,
Sam knew publicly in our current American climate, like service that said, you cannot move. Like when I deposit with you, you're not going to touch my money. And I said, Sam, if that's true, where's the money of all these people? There were things that were coming out like questions about, okay, they say they have all this money. Where on chain is it? So like the blockchain, everything's publicly, you can see it. Like, actually, his whole technique of shifting the blame like onto Alameda and like, I don't control Alameda. I've seen something very similar. I'm investigating this Ponzi scheme that's offshore. Ethereum, what are we tracking here? And then it goes to some mixer somewhere, and then we don't know where it goes after that.
So when Sam Bankman-Fried was working with
you put $100,000 into this little mixer, and then it sends $100,000 out later, and nobody knows where that money came from.
What is a mixer? How does it work?
It's interesting. So the most famous example is Tornado Cash, and go start trading with it, unless, obviously we have FDIC insurance, stuff like that. But like they didn't have that. They just take your money, go trade with it, and that's where the disaster started. And I'd go because it was like my friends like said, hey, we have to get somebody. You want to go? And I was like, sure, I'll go. I was like kind of fascinated. And you'd see these guys, A1Z, A16Z. It was one of those, Sequoia or A16Z. One of them wrote this glowing review of Sam, basically saying he's going to be one of the first trillionaires. So all just kind of grifting here. And so, but you'd see him in nice cars. And so I was like, what am I looking at? And then as I'm doing my YouTube show, I'm like, I get fed a bunch of. So by the third interview, I'd studied him and I said, okay, how do we get down to FTX's responsibility in this whole thing? And I kept coming back to, it was the terms of Friedberg, shady. This guy
allegedly shady.
Dan Friedberg. No, he's definitely shady. I'll say that. This guy.
What was his? I remember, but what was his?
Was going to undo sort of everything. Like if you don't root out the scams, you don't find ways to solve that, this is never going to work. Because if you're great, there's no Ethereum left. There's no Bitcoin left. You don't have the real tokens anymore. You just have your sort of nonsense FTT tokens, the tokens you invented. And he said, everything. I don't have access to the book. Like I basically knew nothing. So anytime you'd call him out on an issue, you'd say, where's the money? He goes, well, I don't know. It's gone. It's Alameda Research. Ask Alameda. I mean, so it's like things are good for now. Yeah.
You don't know.
That was the problem with the FTX. Like, they had hidden all their numbers. Like, Sam had let on your dollars or whatever, euros or whatever, and you put it into this crypto exchange. They have a bank, and they work with that bank. Then they exchange.
I don't really understand what's going. Like the FTX thing, for example, is the best one because I was so in the dark about this thing. I was like, "What is happening? Like, what are they doing?" Try to break it down for us. Like, first of all,
like, you have $1, I'll let you trade with $100, and that's going to be like one reason you come to my offshore exchange. I can offer you more leverage than the guys who are like, yeah, tokens like is the individual. You can think of currency, right? So it's like the individual. So Bitcoin is, you have Bitcoin. Then you have, it's one of the cryptocurrencies. You have Ethereum. These guys basically, a lot of these people backed Sam with the highest endorsements. And so if you're just an average person, you're thinking, well, how much more due diligence can I do than all these other guys? Smart thing, which is something like this happens, you shut up. You don't say anything.
Right.
And then you point at your boss. I mean, that's basically what they did.
Oof.
Which they for sure did stuff wrong to
each other on amphetamines and making billions of dollars. Like, it sounds like a great story if it wasn't illegitimate.
Yeah, ultimately that's the problem. Like, Sam was just hopped up on amphetamines. It's sort of like hard. You kind of have to disprove every single, like, there's always a new, like, health guy telling you that there's some new alternative discovery, whatever. And I was like, this is kind of weird. And I was like, why do they? I have 2 employees, and both of them are overseas. Like, one of them's in London, one of them's in Ukraine. And so for me, I have to pay them, and, I have to do this. I saw this, and my experiences up to that point, it kind of led me to, like, I want to say something. Why is nobody saying anything? It just seemed like there was this, these people pitching this stuff, and nobody was talking about it. So I made this random video, just kept making the videos, and ultimately they never did. But I start doing that, and after I cover get-rich-quick schemes for a while, you do not get to that level and not know that things were wrong.
Well, reading her tweets about amphetamine use was pretty wild, too. The whole scene was wild.
Coinbase or something like that.
Right.
So FTX launches. Let's start with who Sam Bankman-Fried is. He's kind of at the center of all of this. Sam Bankman-Fried is this guy who he's the son of 2 Harvard lawyers. And it's like, well, what's fungibility mean? It means whether